Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, January 21st. Derek Van Riper, Saris here with you with a news-driven episode. We got some breaking news on the free agent front. We know where Roki Sasaki is going to begin his big league career. I think we had some creeping suspicions all along that he was going to join the Dodgers. That became official, but the Dodgers did a few other things, bolstering their bullpen. Anthony Santander has a new home. We have a high school player making the leap from Japan, signing a deal with the A's. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. Baseball Prospectus has some new Arsenal metrics out. So we're taking a little detour from the position preview series for today. We get back at that tomorrow on Wednesday. 3 outfield preview episodes coming up this week. So a ton of ground to cover. Briefly, how was your weekend?
It was good. We went to Fisherman's Wharf, which is like really a touristy thing, but there weren't that many people there. It was a beautiful day, and also had to go all the way to Sacramento for Science Olympiad. So now I'm traveling officially for my son for science things, and he had to. I did a little scoring too, so I was a volunteer judge for the Rube Goldberg machines, and it was fun, but it was also stressful because these kids, I'm telling them that their score, and then some of them just weren't good, and I ended up doing a little bit of coaching, being so this is why this is why I didn't score, and if you keep doing this, you want to do this, this is a big score that you didn't do, you should do that next time. You know what I mean? Ended up being a kind of a coach in the end, but just an interesting slice of life through the weekend. A day at home, a day in the wharf, and a day in Sacramento. So,
did you wear a I Am Science shirt or hat?
No, because they're not made yet. Hint, hint, hint.
Right.
We're actually in the Discord. Speaking of it, in the Discord, DM one of us if you are interested in being the sort of haranguer of merch or whatever, because there's been some people who want to do that and we can't do it, so somebody else get on top of it and we'll help you.
Yeah, do that. Jump on the Discord. You can join that. A lot of good conversation happening there, and we'll get to some topics from the Discord, including some mailbag questions later on in the show. Speaking of merch, I bet the Dodgers are going to move a lot because Roki Sasaki has chosen to join the Dodgers. I don't think this is that much of a surprise, given, Shohei Ohtani's there. They're probably the best team in baseball by structure and spending and all sorts of factors right now. This is one of those things that I think is only more frustrating to a lot of people because of the way international free agency works for players like Sasaki coming out of Japan before hitting the full service time agreement necessary to become actual full-fledged free agents, right? This is not like the Yoshinobu Yamamoto deal. This was going to be a cap deal all along. We know Sasaki met with a lot of teams. He wanted presentations. One thing that's come out in the reporting sense is that Sasaki wanted presentations that answered a question about why teams felt his velocity dipped in 2024. I think it's a great question. And if you're in the position of Roki Sasaki, getting as many top minds around baseball to weigh in on that is a great idea because it's a little bit of a mystery, right? Is it arm health? Is it mechanical? Could it be something else? But all right, what do we make of this? Roki Sasaki to the Dodgers, this is the expected outcome all along. So it doesn't change fantasy expectations all that much, but how much better do you think the Dodgers just got with this addition, which isn't even an isolation because they've been so aggressive this winter?
Yeah, it's tough to say because he did lose 2 miles an hour, and it went from 98.9 sitting to 96.9. So 96.9 is still pretty good for a starter, but you can tell why somebody who had been hitting 100 regularly in games. It's what if Paul Skeens went from where he was to sitting 96 next year? He would be asking for answers as well. So I can see why he did that. And you can also see in the numbers. So here are the strikeout minus walk rates of the the recent pitchers that have come over from Japan. And, if you use a 3-year strikeout minus walk rate, and the reason you don't use home run rates is because they don't have as many home run hitters in Japan. And so like Yamamoto gave up 2 homers in 171 innings in 2023. Just 2. I can't imagine anybody doing that in baseball, like pitching nearly 200 innings and giving up 2 homers. He gave up 7 homers in 90 innings last year, Yamamoto did. So you can really focus on K minus BB. You can see the better pitchers are at the top, the worst pitchers at the bottom. The pitchers who didn't even make this list are the pitchers that that were not the best ones. So at the top of this list is Sasaki with a 28.4 K minus BB. That's so good. I mean, 28.4 would be a great strikeout rate. So to have that with the walk rate subtracted is amazing. Otani himself only had a 22.7. Yu Darvish had a 22.5. Yamamoto 22.2. So that's the top 4. The problem is that last year, Sasaki went down to, I think, sort of like a 21.8. Actually below 21. It was like a 21.5. So he would have been between Masahiro Tanaka with a 21.7 and Shota Imanaga with a 21.3. So he goes from the best pitcher by K minus BB coming over from Japan to like 5th best or 6th best. And I think generally that's the difficulty where, people talking about what Roki Sasaki is going to do this year are running into, is that he's either like amazing or pretty good. And if you talk about the flaws, people might put a headline on it like, is he a bust? Or like, doesn't like Roki Sasaki. But it's more just nuance of like, I can see the flaws and I can see what, he doesn't have good spin rates. He doesn't spin the ball well. He's never really thrown a good breaking ball. When he was throwing an okay breaking ball, he was throwing a gyro slider 89 miles an hour. And it almost doesn't matter how good your slider is. If you throw it 89 miles an hour, it's good. Now it's down to 83.5, which is below that 85 mile an hour marker. So Sasaki's breaking ball this year is not likely to be good. So, you can say, Still's talking about bad stuff. The velo's down. He doesn't have a good spin. He never had a good breaking ball. Well, you know what my comps are? They're perfect. I think they're really good comps. A high velocity Kodai Senga or a sort of peak Kevin Gossman.
Yeah, those are 2 very good pitchers. Like, think about how we've treated them in fantasy. Think about how good they actually are in terms of, would you choose them to start an elimination game in most rotations? Yeah, and I think if you're in the position of the Dodgers, you're loaded to the point where Roki Sasaki might be your 3rd or 4th best starter today. He has time to work on those things, and I think it's interesting too. I want to point this out because it came up at least once already this season. The oopsie projections for guys that are not included in the initial set, if you see them over at Fangraphs, are going to spit out a replacement level sort of projection. That's what's going on with Roki. I don't think Oopsie's actually throwing a 5.03 ERA on Roki Sasaki. There will be a real projection for him that comes out later. You see Steamer out there at 3.30 for the ERA, 1.11 for the whip, 179 Ks in 139 innings. That's a projected 31.6% strikeout rate. If the velocity's back, I could see that, but I have a hard time paying for that until we have proof, right? Until we get to spring training and we see those longer outings where he's able to sustain the elevated velocity. I think you have to assume the velo stays closer to where it is. Even with that, the ceiling's really high. So we're probably more in the splitting hairs category of, the market's a little too aggressive on Roki Sasaki for redraft leagues. I know for keeper and dynasty leagues, people are talking about him and saying he's the runaway first pick in leagues where players who just signed in the past, basically going back to the 2024 draft, the first year player draft format, he's the runaway first pick. So even with your,
who'd he be going up against? Bazana?
Bazana, the Bazana Condon Caglione class of players.
Yeah, I could see it. I guess I could see it. I don't normally like to put a pitcher at the top, and I took Yamamoto over Langford in one of my leagues, and I kind of wish I could have it back. I usually can find pitching, but any case, I think that's probably true. One thing that keeps me from putting him in the top 15, despite my comps, despite recognizing that he should strike out a lot of guys, is the Dodgers. And I'm not saying this as the Dodgers can't keep anyone healthy thing. No. The Dodgers are going into a 6-man rotation. And, I think that the sort of cap for their pitchers is like 135 innings. Because not only are they going to do 6-man, but they're also going to try and coax all these guys to October. So any little thing that hurts a little bit, they're going to go on the IL preventatively, like even, just to keep them good. So I think that you're talking about maybe Snell gets to 140. We're talking about maybe Snell is the high volume guy on the staff, but I think my general projection for all those guys is 130. What that does, if you do 130 for the top 5 guys, which are Glasnow, Snell, what are we looking at? Glasnow, Snell,
Ohtani even coming off of the shoulder injury, Yamamoto, yeah,
and Roki.
So was your top 5.
I would say Ohtani's probably the low man on this, maybe 110, 120. We've been talking about this in the Discord. I was like, well, he missed all of last year with the elbow, so he should be good there. Then someone brought up the shoulder. It's not the throwing shoulder, so I thought, maybe he'll be fine. But apparently, Dave Roberts said something maybe he misses April as a pitcher. So if that's the case, then he is their 7th starter, and we can give him 100, and we have to find a 5th and 6th starter for them. Dustin May is out of options. So I think Dustin May is making this rotation. Now, that's good news for him because you might be able to give him 110 innings if he can stay together for that many, right? But it's bad news for, the rest of the lineup because I think that they also have Tony Gonsolin, who's not out of options, but has been a starter for them. And I think Tony Gonsolin is their 6th.
I'm going to put the
one
question.
Of those guys, Ohtani just replaces somebody who's hurt, basically, when he comes back.
There's kind of 2 ways to think about this. The first is that they've been doing this already, and now they just have a better cast of characters to do it with. So knowing we've had these caps, knowing that we haven't had a lot of 2-start weeks just because of the way this has worked, trying to use extra days, it's been part of the Dodgers approach for several years now. Even if they don't call it a 6-man rotation all the time, it's something that they do. Look at the days off for starters. Are we going to see an overcorrection where people say, I can't pay full freight for these guys, when the reality that people need to accept is some of them will exceed the projection. A few will go over 130. I'd be stunned if they didn't have 2 starters go over 130 innings. Which 2? Good luck. But the per inning quality will be so good that even if you are rostering 1 or 2 of them that end up missing significant time, you still get the replacement, right? So I just think this is one of those things where relative to other teams, it's not as extreme as it seems. And because we're looking at guys that we wanted to forecast as mostly SP1s and SP2s, we have this sort of added dread. Compared to the other guys like them, they're going to come up way short in innings. I think they're going to come a little bit short in innings, but maybe the quality ends up paying off. Maybe the ratios are better. All right, maybe the strikeout rates are a little higher.
So you're describing, yeah, and there's another way of saying it, and it's awful because these are human beings, but it's just you get because they're crossed so well. There's a price for everyone, There's there's a correct way of valuing everyone, right, in fantasy, and so I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, but I still can't put any of the Dodgers in my top 15, and here's why. Tyler Glasnow last season had the season you're talking about. Mm-hmm. A 3.49 ERA. He managed to strike out I don't have the raw totals. 168 in 134 innings. And that's exactly what we're talking about, right? That's almost what you're talking about with Roki Sasaki, right? You said 174 and 139, right? So Tyler Glasnow had the season that Roki Sasaki is projected for. He had the season that we want out of Dodgers, and he was the 23rd best starting pitcher last year by the auction calculator. Now that's because he had a lot fewer innings than the people in front of him, and maybe some of those valuations are suspect. Like Tyler Holton was the 19th best pitcher last year by the auction calculator. Maybe that's true. But let's say like a good season from these guys is top 20. I can't put them in the top 15 because I think that that's sort of the cap for a 130 inning season right now is 20. So a lot of these guys, basically, I have them with Spencer Strider right now in my working ranks. I have them with Spencer Strider, coming off of injury, and who else do I have in that area? Blake Snell, Tyler Glass now. I have Garrett Cole a little bit ahead of them because I think Garrett Cole can throw more innings, I have Max Fried around there, and I have Yamamoto there. I just basically have all the Dodgers and Spencer Strider in like a little injured tier from 15 to 20. It's like it's the best I can do to figure this out. I do agree with you. The one guy that I have sort of a step above this is DeGrom, who I have at a similar innings projection, but I think his ERA could start with a 2.
I think that's sort of the bet that
higher.
The Dodgers are making on a lot of these guys is that the ratios are going to be so good. Not that they care. I mean, it's run prevention.
Like even better than Glasnow's season last year.
Yeah, I kind of think that's what they're looking at. And I believe it. Now, I think you're right by volume to say, yeah, they're not top 15, but they're not far from it. I think the market's treating them similarly. So I think they're still very draftable where they're going. I don't think we're seeing inflation because of team quality on Roki and Glasnow and Yamamoto. And injuries are a part of that for all those guys. I think generally people are a little scared off because there are pretty significant, at least yellow flags with all of these guys as good as they are.
I think you could do a really interesting pairing. Even if you don't invest in one of the top 5 starting pitchers, I got Corbin Burns as the 8th pitcher in one of my drafts. You could take Corbin Burns and one of those Dodgers, to balance out some of your strikeout rate. There are some other really high floor guys, Framber Valdez, Logan Webb, George Kirby. They're high floor guys that don't have standout strikeout rates. And if you added one of those to one of those Dodgers, you might come out with what ends up being something like a pocket aces, and so I definitely think there's use cases where you can do that. I wouldn't want to start out with DeGrom and Sasaki. I think
that might be a little in a shallow league, maybe, but in the deeper the league, the harder it is to pull that off because the quality of this replacement inning starts to go down considerably if you're in a 15-team league. I'm looking at the prices and going, maybe I could stack Dodger starters because they actually are stretched out enough where you can just keep drafting them and they'll cover for each other and the bottom of your roster will cover for the guys that are actually out. So I don't know.
I love your stars and scrubs.
I do. It works. It serves me well.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Roki Sasaki, though. Tanner Scott goes to the Dodgers on a 4-year deal. First question, is he their closer? Like, are they going to use one closer and is Tanner Scott the closer?
I don't know. I mean, he's a lefty. Who's their best lefty other than him? It's mostly righties. I can't think of a lefty right now.
Yeah, man. Do you think that matters though? Like to them, Scott's good against hitters on both sides.
Yeah, but Scott was amazing against Ohtani. So Scott, you know what I mean? Like
that's all this was really about. It was just not having to face Tanner Scott,
but
just eliminating him by signing him.
If you got Soto coming up in the 8th, don't you bring up Scott against him?
I think so. Probably.
Yeah. So I think Scott is like, their best reliever. And if Kopech is healthy, there's a lot of chatter about Kopech, I guess. What did Bob Nightingale say? He's hurt. He's going to miss
and I saw a report from Fabian Ardaya this morning that pointed back to something he pitched through in the playoffs, like an actual injury that wasn't bad enough to sideline him then. So we'll have to see like what actually surfaces from this. I'm so used to him being banged up from the end of last year, but Alex Vesia is probably their best lefty otherwise. Because of Vesia, I think you can use Scott as a closer.
Yeah,
you can just match up Vesia if you want to.
Against Scott, yeah. Against somebody like Soto, yeah, you could do that.
But the complicating factor here is it looks like they're also adding Kirby Yates. And if you didn't have Kirby Yates on your roster, or if you weren't a Rangers fan, I don't think you may have realized how good Kirby Yates actually was. I've missed out on Kirby Yates entirely last year. And I shouldn't have because I had someone we trust telling me Kirby Yates looked like a good value, looked like a good opportunity. Didn't listen.
I don't think he has the fastball to close, though. I mean, I think that was a decent year for him, but I don't think he has the fastball to close. And I think that's why they kind of moved away from Evan Phillips over time. Like, Evan Phillips has pretty good stuff, but he doesn't have a great fastball. So I would say Trinan, I would say like Kopech and Scott are like co-closers, and Trinan is the setup guy. That's how I would try to get it across. Now, if Kopech's hurt,
20 each, 20 saves each. Is that what you're thinking?
I think so, because I think you can just be like, oh, the big righties are up in the 8th, or the big lefties are up in the 8th, and whichever way it's skew. I mean, I really respect Kopech. I think he'd be a great closer. So, the health is a question that we can't really answer right now. I think that's going to be one of those ones where we find out a lot in like 2 weeks when pitchers and catchers report, and he has to actually stand in front of somebody and say what happened.
Yeah. In the meantime, I think Kopech kind of falls into the don't really want to draft him bucket after being someone that pre-Scott and pre-Yates I actually liked a lot, because I thought there was a chance he'd be the primary source of saves for the Dodgers. Now it's like a shared opportunity, if that. Now it's some lingering questions about health. Lovely. It seems to be up and down the entire roster right now. Real quick, I don't want the whole show to be about this. Do you think the Dodgers are ruining baseball discourse is just ridiculous? Because I don't think the Dodgers are ruining baseball.
Well, I did want to say one thing real quick about Tanner Scott, because I've seen some people be like, what about the bad command? He has bad command. But I did want to point out that relievers in general have worse command. If you look at just the major league average for walk rate for starters, it's 7.2%. For relievers, it's 9%. So just remember that you're not comparing to 8% or whatever as league average. So when Scott is projected for a 10 or 11% walk rate, that's bad, but it's not as bad as if he was a starter. You kind of have to have a different like sort of rubric. As for the Dodgers running baseball, no, I mean, if I was a Dodger fan right now, I would feel great. My team is doing everything they can to put together the best possible team. I don't think that's wouldn't every other fan of every other team feel great if their team did as much? Now, it becomes a question is like, well, my team's owner can't do that. So then that's why I'm mad. We don't know. It's like a big black box. We don't know what they can do. We don't know what they choose to do. We don't know what they can do. And for every sort of, let's just have a floor without a cap, you're just never going to get a salary floor without a cap. You can't force the bottom to spend more without, reining in the top. And baseball has tried everything they can to tamp down player salaries. What is a draft? A draft is a way to reduce salaries. What is an international draft? It's a way to reduce salaries. What is an international spendings limit? That's a way to reduce salaries. So like they're trying all their different ways to do it. Arbitration is a way to reduce that. It's like they're doing all these things to try and reduce it. They would love to have a cap. The ownership would love to have a cap. It would just be an excuse. It would be a built-in excuse for not spending. It would be like, the rules say I can't spend, and they're already, giving plenty of excuses like that. So I don't want to give them another excuse. I think you had a great quote from Joe Sheehan, though.
Yeah, so Joe Sheehan had a great message here. Just the last 4 seasons alone, 23 of 30 major league teams have made the playoffs. 12 of 30 have won their division. 4 different teams have won the World Series, and 7 have played in the World Series. I think the Astros only team that played in
how many years?
4. So just the last 4 seasons since the shortened 2020 season. 23 out of 30 teams have made the playoffs. And 10 have reached the LCS round. And as Joe writes, I truly don't know what higher level of parity you could possibly ask for. I mean, I feel like we forget the conversations that happen around this sport in August and September where people are saying the regular season doesn't mean anything. Too many teams make the playoffs. Look at the results of more teams making the playoffs. Look who we had a Rangers Diamondbacks World Series 2 years ago. Like what? Yeah. What are we doing here?
And I would like to posit that there is such a thing as too much parity. I do believe this because if it was truly random every year and anybody could make it, and the Marlins just won the World Series this coming season, I think it would just like break our brain. It wouldn't make sense as a fan. You want some sense of like, oh, these teams are on the rise and these teams are on the fall. You want some idea of like who's good and who's not. If you just turn on a game and you have no idea who could win it, and you have you can't even play along. You just be like, it's just utter chaos. So on the the continuum from everything is super predictable to utter chaos, I think we're in a decent place. There are baseball. If you just look at the numbers in terms of like how predictable baseball is compared to other sports, it's less predictable than other sports. On the home field advantage. Home field advantage is the strongest in basketball, second strongest in football. Hockey goes third, and baseball's fourth. Baseball has the weakest home field advantage. That sort of speaks to how much chaos there is in baseball. And if you think about the NBA playoffs, I feel like they get the two best teams in the finals more than almost anybody.
Right. I think if you have a frustration with baseball right now, it's probably directed at a different group of teams and owners. It's not the Dodgers. It's not the teams at the top, right? This has been happening, I think, really our whole lives, or at least throughout the entire time of our fanhood, because before it was the Dodgers, it was the Yankees. The Yankees were the team that would go out and get every right. Big free agent, right? And now it just happens to be a different club doing it. I agree with something you said, and I've seen this written before a little bit earlier, where you said, there is an advantage to being in the biggest markets and having the biggest TV deals. And that's true. And having deeper pockets. There is a point at which Steve Cohen can outspend a lot of the other owners and ownership groups, right? That's true. Where I think you have to be mad if you're a fan of a different team is if you have sat out free agency completely, right? If you have an owner or an ownership group that's just sitting back, not making moves, not increasing payroll.
Or you're a team like the Guardians who made the playoffs and traded away one of your best hitters to sign a 38-year-old, on a cheap deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the Dodgers or is it more of the teams like the Guardians who aren't doing anything?
I think that list of owners and ownership groups is so much longer. That's where your frustration should be.
Or the Cubs. Like, why don't the Cubs should go all the way up to the salary, the first salary apron. They should be. They should even go past it probably in terms of market size, in terms of money that they have at their disposal, in terms of TV deal. They own their own TV channel, all that stuff. They should have won Tanner Scott.
Yeah, and I think the Guardians example, it's like when we think about the Guardians, this team that does really well with limited major league payroll resources, much like Tampa Bay, when they have an opportunity in free agency to address a clear need, let's say that the Guardians maybe could use a corner outfielder. Does that seem like a fair example? When the Guardians can't go get Michael Conforto on a one-year deal and choose not to go get him on a one-year deal, and the Dodgers do, and you're like, what the heck? The Dodgers don't even need Michael Conforto. That's the stuff on the smaller end. Like, I get it. Yeah, the Guardians aren't going to throw Juan Soto money out there. Fine. They're not even playing on the level you'd expect them to play at. That, I think, is what ruins baseball. When you could be a fan of a team that literally sits the offseason out.
When the A's are spending more money in free agency.
Yeah. There are teams that are competitive teams that are not doing anything right now. And yeah, I get it. The Padres situation right now is a little complicated, but doing nothing is bad for the sport. It's not the Dodgers that are ruining baseball. It's the teams that are sitting back and doing little to nothing to get better year after year after year. That's what's hurting the sport.
I mean, obviously the Yankees and Dodgers would vote against this, but I would like to know if sharing local TV money is possible.
Yeah. And the mechanics of that would get complicated real fast.
It's politics. It's owner politics, right? But could you unite the smaller market and mid-market teams to vote against the Dodgers and Yankees on this matter? Maybe, if you cared to, if you thought it'd be good for for baseball. And I would say that there are small little hints that it's possible that we could be moving towards something like that, where more of the TV money is shared. And the reason I say this is because Rob Manfred is making these comments about how he would like more teams to not be under contract locally with their TV money so that he can sell games piecemeal to all the streaming companies before they do anything else. And if you think about it that way, that starts to be a like a locally shared model where he's going to be like, oh yeah, you want, Cubs Guardians on this day. Like, he's going to be trying to sell single games and packages of games. And if he does that, then everybody should get from that money. Right. So as these teams are losing their local Bally's and FanDuel or whatever, baseball is very happy to gobble them up and start producing them themselves, because they would love to basically just have an array of games to sell and send them to the highest bidder, basically like variable pricing models. And if they're doing that, I think then everyone gets a share in that. So I think we are at a crux of where the economics of baseball might be changing, and that TV is the key. I'm a little bit more optimistic than some people, because a lot of people are just saying, oh, that the cable model is dead, this is going to be really bad for baseball. I think that through streaming, there might actually, because I'm a consumer of streaming too. When I did, what I realized was I cut the cord because it was cheap, right? And Hulu was way cheaper. But I've realized I'm spending just as much, if not more, than I used to on cable.
Yeah, that didn't last. You knew that wasn't going to last, though, right? That was temporary. Like, we can compete on price now, and then when we eliminate the competitor, we can raise prices and make more than our competitor ever did.
But also, now, in order to get everything I used to get, I now have to have Peacock and Amazon Prime and Netflix, and so like it's going to be something similar where the consumer is going to end up paying more to see their baseball. But that is an opportunity for baseball to sort of, get more money out of the consumer and do something different with their TV money, which might change who gets the TV money and how the TV money is distributed. That's all I'm pointing at.
I would feel better about that if I knew that came with the promise of 30 ownership groups actually trying harder, but I also know that it's not going to play out quite like that. They could
still just pocket the money.
Yeah, that's still probably part of the end game on this one. Back to some baseball news you should know. Anthony Santander heads to the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays got one, and it kind of leads to a few different questions in the sense of like, okay, you added power. You needed power. You made your lineup better. And the long-term implications of this trade, I can't find anybody, or this signing, I can't find anybody who likes this long-term and thinks it's going to age well. But the more fun way to think about it is, what does it mean for the 2025 Blue Jays? Are they a team that would swoop in and possibly add Pete Alonso on some kind of short-term deal, or do something else to supplement their lineup? Because they do feel like a team kind of caught in the middle. The middle's not bad. We were just talking earlier about the Rangers Diamondbacks World Series just a couple of years ago. Maybe the Blue Jays can cobble it together, make a few moves over the course of the year, and end up being good enough to get there. We know that's sometimes all you need to actually make that run, but it still feels like even in that framework, they're another bat away from being a more serious mid-pack team that will make the postseason in 2025.
Yeah, the Santander is the slugger that they needed behind some of the guys that can get on base. But in terms of really standout on base guys, they've got Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Let me actually look at projections instead of what happened last year. But because last year it was basically just Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Oh, and Spencer Horwitz, who's not there anymore. So anyway, in terms of projected OBP, they've got Vladimir Guerrero Jr. 383, Alejandro Kirk 350, Bo Bichette 330, Santander 319. And then Springer, Schneider, Jimenez. So, this is not going to be a team that gets on base that well. Is it a team that's going to slug well? Well, they got, in terms of slugging percentage, they have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Santander, 545 and 474. And then you go down to Bo Bichette, 440, Dalton Varsho, 421, 405. So it's not going to be a team that slugs all that well. Is it a deep team? They've got... In terms of WRC plus, they've got Guerrero, Santander, Bo Bichette, Alejandro Kirk, Springer, Orelvis Martinez counts, Dalton Varsho, Davis Schneider, and Andres Jimenez as league average or better. So it's a slightly deep team, I guess. That's 9 guys that can have a WRC plus of 100 or better. That's not bad.
And they really got 2 because they did add Jeff Hoffman not that long ago too, to bolster the bullpen. So it's not just like the off season of Anthony Santander and nothing else. I do think a lot rides on the Bo bounce back. A lot rides on adjustments that you've mentioned that they could make with Andres Gimenez. They believe they saw something that he was doing differently when he was showing a little more power a couple of years ago in Cleveland.
Yeah, but the projections don't care about any of that. The projections are,
Right.
are pretty just like across the board. Like, yeah, a little bit of bounce back for Bo Bichette, of course, but not going to give Gimenez more power just because, there's some biomechanical change they can make. So,
Yeah.
I think the baseline for this team is decent. I think if they were in a different division, like if you just drop them in one of the centrals, wouldn't they be a contender for the division?
Yeah. So you're saying maybe like an 85, 86 win projection is what you are back of the napkining for the Blue Jays at the current time?
Yeah, and if things broke right, that would be Bo Bichette bouncing back, Gimenez adding power, Springer, not turning into a corpse, and maybe Bowden Francis's breakout being legit, and maybe finding somebody between Yadier Rodriguez and Jake Bloss to be actual number 5, and maybe Will Wagner or Ernie Clement sustain some of the good stuff we saw last year. I think if all those things happen, Jeff Hoffman stays healthy, yeah, you can start getting into the 90s. But those are, that's
a lot of maybes.
It's a lot of maybes. Those are the rose-colored glasses, and it almost never happens that way, except it does sometimes, right? Like those are the years that you're better than people expected.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see if they're able to pull off one more big move. It feels like one more would make a pretty big difference for them right now. As far as
would you
nudge.
put Bregman at third for them and make Clement a utility guy?
Oh yes, I'd much rather have Bregman than Alonso because of how the roster's built. I think
if you get
Bregman
Alonso,
really
you have
there.
Guerrero and Alonso clogging up DH in first, and Will Wagner, Davis Schneider, Ernie Clement, all trying to play third and backup outfield. And you can't hide Springer at DH. And yeah.
Yeah, but like a 330,
Santander
340 range
DH.
OBP with 20 homer power from Bregman and good defense at third base. Yes, that would fit really, really well. I don't know if it'll be a long deal or if it'll just be like a short-term deal. I mean, we've seen it before. Maybe that's the best fit where Bregman goes there and shows the power still there, gets the OBP back up for another year, and then gets more of the payday he was hoping for this winter a year from now. That might be one of the better case scenarios for the Jays.
Yeah, like a 3-year $60 million with a 3-year $75 or something with
an opt-out after this year.
After one, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably what it's going to look like. Let's move on to another story that's really interesting. Shotaro Morri has signed with the A's out of high school from Japan. Almost everything about that is kind of wild, right? We don't think of the A's as a team that necessarily does well in international free agency, and we rarely see high school players from Japan.
Well, they did get Cespedes.
They did get Cespedes, but especially just from, I can't even remember if I've ever
seen.
Just
good for a surprise every 10 years.
Yeah, right. And Morri is a two-way player who the A's are going to keep developing as a two-way player. I think by most accounts would have been a top 10 pick in the NPB draft had he stayed in Japan. But he wanted to start his professional career in Major League Baseball sooner. The deal's worth just over $1.5 million. This is a pretty big deal because Morri could be a bit of a trailblazer for a younger generation of players coming through in Japan who might not go the traditional route of beginning their professional careers in their home country, staying for as many as 9 years. Some guys do leave a little earlier. They reach those agreements to do so. We've seen that happen. And this also comes not that far after Rintaro Sasaki ended up going to Stanford out of high school instead of staying in Japan, right? So
yeah, I'm excited to see him soon.
Yeah, this will be this upcoming season. So there's a lot changing, it seems like, in Japan for amateur players and how they're thinking about their careers. And I'm just curious what you think about Morri and what this really means.
Yeah, I was talking to Patrick Newman, a friend of mine that also used to run NPB Tracker online, the website that had some pitch data from Japan, and he stays on top of the game over there. And he pointed out to me the thing that's the most eye-opening about this is that the $1.5 million number, that is more than first-round picks get in Japan. So a lot of times it's just about the money. And if the money is, if you are, a first round pick in Japan and you can get more money going to America, where a lot of them want to go eventually. They want to be on the biggest, on the biggest screens. They want to be in the biggest league in the world, and they're seeing Shohei Ohtani succeed. They're seeing Yamamoto succeed. They're seeing all these guys succeed. They think they can do it, and the money is better if you sign with the team directly. Then you kind of feel like that decision's almost made. So I think this is going to happen more often, even if Morii doesn't succeed, just because if teams are willing to put $1 or $2 million on the table for a guy, they can start stealing first round picks from Japan,
which is not great for the state of professional baseball in Japan, but it is.
That'll do weird things too, because if it makes the league worse, then all of our translations and all our ideas of like what the talent level in Japan are going to change.
Yeah, so I mean, it's I don't know. It gives you mixed feelings, I think, but I generally feel like in sport, you should have agency over your own career. So it feels like the right outcome, even though there's downside that comes with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, one of the things I would like to do, and we've talked about this, is lower the age for international free agency. I think that would do some stuff where you could have players go to Japan and dominate for 3 or 4 years and still come over young, and that might be one of the better outcomes. But I do think that this probably raised eyebrows in Japan too. I don't think that they like, and when I say they, I mean probably the leadership of NPB is not super happy about Morii and Sasaki coming over. Not Roki Sasaki, Rintaro.
Mm. Yep, times are changing though. We're seeing that for sure. Or
maybe even Roki makes him a little bit mad because he sort of forced his way out. With more years left, he could have played in Japan.
Yeah, I wonder if the next iteration of how rules change and just plans change, if it leads to more players from other countries going to Japan to play eventually. Like they just have more roster spots available.
They relax the gaijin rules. They have rules where you can only have 1 or 2 foreign players on your team. Yeah.
Yeah, KBO, Korean League, has some restrictions on the number of foreign players you can have as well. But I wonder if that changes and everything becomes a little bit more of a two-way street where players go to the best league they can get to. And
yeah, because you'd have a lot of like 30, 35-year-olds from America wanting to go over there. Mm-hmm. Just a little side note, it was kind of interesting. The Pirates claimed Trey Cabbage off of waivers and then had a financial deal with a Japanese team. And those financial deals can be worth mid 6 figures. So they might have just made like $150,000 on the side, like claiming Trey Cabbage and selling him to Japan. Anyway,
I mean, like, what?
It's just a weird little thing.
I think that fits under the who's really ruining baseball? Like that's
right. And who's their biggest signing this offseason? Do they have one?
Which the order? Okay,
they signed somebody, didn't they?
Have they signed anybody?
Pirates? Who the Pirates signed? Let me see. They signed.
We sure have forgotten quickly if they have.
They signed. I don't.
Oh, they made that move to get Spencer Horowitz, the trade. They brought back Andrew McCutchen. And bringing back McCutchen.
I guess they signed McCutchen. There we go.
No, that doesn't count. They brought back a guy who was already there.
Yeah.
Andrew McCutchen's great, but where was Andrew McCutchen going to go? Like who? Like, come on. What are we doing here? You know who they have though? They didn't sign him because they already had him. Billy Cook.
Let Billy cook.
Let Billy cook. Can he cook? Can he do that too? We think he can play everywhere. All right. So Baseball Prospectus has some new Arsenal metrics that came out, and it's a lot about how pitches interact with each other, right? We talk about pitching plus, stuff plus. the model you have, and those are a lot. Those focus on like pitches in isolation. How good is this pitch based on its characteristics? And I think what was really cool about the Arsenal metrics that was dropped is it featured a lot of Tobias Myers, which I really liked. But I think Tobias Myers fits into this bucket of pitchers that have wide arsenals, and because nothing is amazing, we can often underrate them. And I think Arsenal metrics really help us understand the relationship between pitches and why guys can succeed without elite capital S stuff, right? They have ways of making it work because it creates confusion for the hitters. It creates a last second guessing game, or it makes the anticipation more difficult, or it makes the quality of contact worse, right? There's all these things that can really work in the pitcher's favor when pitches work really well together. So what were some of your takeaways kind of looking at the introduction of the new Arsenal metrics that BP rolled out?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. These are not an exact match, but a continuation of the work by Driveline that we talked about with Mix Plus and Match Plus. I forget which is which, but one was basically the distance. I guess that would be by Baseball Prospectus, the movement spread. So that's the sort of difference in movements between your pitches. And then the other one was how well your pitches like fit together or tunneled together, if I remember correctly, with Mix and Match Plus. The suite that Baseball Prospectus turned out is pitch type probability, surprise factor, movement spread, and velocity spread. Pitch type probability and surprise factor, surprise factor is, basically the, like how surprising the observed pitch movement was based on the distribution of possible pitch movements. So how different a pitch can be from the other pitches. Velocity spread is the same. It's like basically the velocity band you can cover. Pitch type probability is has to do with tunneling. Is sort of how well the player can determine which pitch is coming given the release point and the pitch trajectory. So basically, these are all Arsenal metrics that like kind of tell you a little bit about how the pitches fit together. And what's interesting is that stuff does try to have something of this, where we have an anchor in the fastball, and that we define the secondary pitches off of that. So there is some sort of idea of tunneling and making decisions, and the fastball is the anchor. The problem is that I think that there can be some interactions between the other pitches. You can expect slider and get curve, or expect curve and get slider. Like it's not necessarily that you'd be sitting slider, but yes, I think even that there's increasing evidence that some teams are sitting slider. If you have them sitting slider, that'll hurt your model. If you have them, you expect them to be sitting fastball, right? So these things will capture a little bit of like the interactions of the other pitches. And, we have here, just courtesy Baseball Prospectus, this is surprise factor. And, you're looking at, how much can these pitchers surprise you given the width of their arsenal? A lot of these are basically describing the width and breadth of a pitcher's arsenal. And Logan Gilbert has a wide, I think Max Fried is probably the poster boy for this, a large movement spread, a large velocity spread, a large number of pitches that he can go to. And it's not a guarantee that you're good. Carlos Carrasco is high on this list. Kenta Maeda is high on this list. Marcus Stroman is high on this list. But it does have something to do with how many times you can turn the lineup over. And so one really eye-opening chart that they have is that batters make better swing decisions the more they see pitches. We know this is a third time through the order penalty, so that the third time through the order, the batter sees the pitches better and does better. And what they found is that batters with high surprise factor or movement spread or velocity spread, pitchers with that, the batters in the third time through the order, they don't do as well. So it softens the third time through the order penalty. So basically, what these get at is, Stuff Plus tells you, we said this once, like Jeff Ponce over at Baseball America once said, like if you if you are too stuff heavy, if you go too far down the road of Stuff Plus, you can end up with a lot of relievers. And that's true because you end up with a lot of guys who just have outstanding pitches and they don't all fit together in the way that a starters needs to. And we've noticed this ourselves, like, on this podcast, that like, they're the Chris Bassett types and these Max Fried types, these pitchers that do better than their stuff number because they have wide arsenals and they know how to use them. And so this is quantifying some of that. And so I'll try to throw that as much as if they release the full thing. It's not on their leaderboards yet, but as much as I can, I'll look to these sort of factors. I do have in my rankings right now that won't show to everybody, but in my working rankings, I have a column that says number of fastballs, and I have a column that says number of pitches. So I have been sort of doing that in sort of a crude way. It's been looking at this. This gives us a chance to quantify those things and have them on a leaderboard and add that to our arsenal. We had another question from Dr. Tim, right? Is it Tim?
Yeah, Dr. Tim.
Dr. Tim asked, how do we use Stuff Plus best? And I have an easy answer for you, which is with debuts. The smaller the sample of information is, the more important Stuff Plus is. So if you have one start of information, then Stuff Plus is one of the main things you should be looking at. Once you get to 5 starts of information, you should be looking at strikeout minus walk rate. That's more powerful. And once you get to 5 seasons, you can actually start to look at ERA, actually. Like 5 seasons, you start to get a sense of, these guys have quirks that might be repeatable that aren't being captured by all of our metrics. But one start is great for Stuff Plus. It's great for relievers. I do think for closing especially, I want fastball Stuff Plus. I think we've seen that guys who have like an incredible slider but not an incredible fastball can maybe close at times, but aren't necessarily what teams want to go to. So I would say fastball Stuff Plus overall Stuff Plus is really good for finding closers. And then if you've got a guy who just came up and you don't know anything about him, you want to know about Stuff Plus. So this is these numbers are sort of like in the off season when you're looking at different pitchers and you're like, well, this pitcher has good Stuff Plus, but we had 5 starts or we had 10 starts. And I'm not sure he's a starter, then you can start to look at these BP factors to be like, is he a starter long term? I don't know who's like this. Bowden Francis. Bowden Francis is somebody who just started a little bit and has some Stuff Plus information for you, has some results information, could go back to the pen, was just in the pen. Is he a good guy to pick up this year? Stuff Plus would say he's an okay guy to pick up this year, but these metrics from Baseball Prospectus have Bowden Francis as the number 1 guy for movement spread for starters. He has a big old splitter and a big old curveball and a little slider and a fastball with ride. So he takes up a lot of space and he uses that to his advantage. So, I think these numbers make me feel a little bit better about Bowden Francis, about Spencer Arrighetti, Grayson Rodriguez. These are types of pitchers that have wide arsenals and decent Stuff Plus numbers, actually. So it's like, all the things are pointing in the right direction for them to be good starters.
Check out the full post over at Baseball Prospectus. It's unlocked, but you should support BP if you can. Get a subscription. It's called Introducing BP's New Arsenal Metrics. Steven Sutton Brown put it together. There's some really cool visualizations in there as well as you go through it. Highly recommend it. Good work all around there. The name that actually popped into my head because he's been sitting at the top of my queue in a draft and hold for, how do we use Stuff Plus is Landon Roop. Landon Roop pops in the model, hasn't had a ton of big league innings. The role's kind of funky, right? 23 appearances, 4 starts. The stuff model really likes him. The secondary is more than the fastballs. Like the sinker is fine. The 4-seamer is like one of the lower 4-seamers you're going to find in the model. But yeah, like Roop kind of is the sort of guy that I might not even look at for super deep leagues at all. But when I see how much he pops based on the quality of his pitches, he kind of creeps into okay, I'll throw a dart there because the park's good. Maybe there's a couple guys in front of him that are going to open up innings because they have injury risk. Like it's kind of like finding flyers that don't otherwise stand out is one of the main things I use it for. And certainly like in deeper leagues where you can stash relievers, finding future closers. I have had a lot of success getting a little bit ahead and figuring out which relievers are going to end up moving up in the pecking order in their respective bullpen over the course of the season, just leaning on stuff plus.
Yeah, I would look at it. Rupa got hurt a little bit in the revision. But he still has an outstanding curveball, breaking ball that I think can be a foundation. He talked about learning a cutter too. If he's cutter, sinker, slider, curve, that's enough for San Francisco, So I still agree that he's did he show up on any of these lists at BP?
He didn't show up on the BP ones, but just thinking about that question from Dr. Tim, I was like, it's guys like that. It's just, it leads me to dig into guys that didn't really fit into a role. They didn't quite get into the high leverage spot. They didn't quite have a starting opportunity to call their own. And a lot of times, the workload is a tad on the small side. I do think the BP stuff, it helps illustrate guys like Tobias Myers at the lower end and higher end like Max Fried. It really helps put some more context to that. And if you watch those guys a lot, you probably have made some observations like that. But if you don't watch them all the time and you're trying to kind of figure out from a numbers perspective, like how do they do it? I think this is a big part of quantifying what's been missing for a long time.
Yeah, Simeon Woods Richardson, Rangers Suarez, Bowden Francis, and Tanner Bybee are all guys that don't have great stuff plus numbers that show up in their metrics as a positive. So I think that's an interesting thing. The other one that I would just suggest too is if you want kind of a real shorthand way into this, Oopsie. Oopsie includes stuff plus in its projections and nobody else does. So, you can look at something as simple as Jesus Tinoco's, Fangraphs page, and you're wondering, that seems like the closing role in Florida is in Miami is open. Somebody else might be using Steamer or ATC in their projections. They get a 3.79 ERA and they think, oh, it's probably going to be Fauché. Well, Oopsie has a 3.54 for Tinoco, which is something that a closer that's a closer level ERA, and Fauché has a 3.87. And if you go back down to the test that I was suggesting, you'll see that Fauché could be kind of like an outstanding breaking ball, not great fastball guy. Whereas Tinoco has a better four-seamer than Fauché. So I think that's the kind of analysis that I would go through for closers, and that's how I'd use stuff plus, kind of evaluating two pitchers that could be a closer.
We've got a few other mailbag questions we'll get to here before we go. This one comes from This Hitty Beetle. I'm not allowed to swear on the show anymore. Neither is Eno. It's a company-wide policy.
I thought I found a loophole. You're not allowed to.
No, that's not the loophole. So what I have to do when I see a handle in Discord that has what I assume to be a swear word in it, I have to put the capital letters in different places and pronounce them in weird ways. So This Hitty Beetle.
It's a Hitty Beetle.
The Hitty Beetle wants to know about Spencer Torkelson's long-term value with Colt Keith moving to first base, Kerry Carpenter largely being a DH, and thinking about how Torque kind of fits into not just the 2025 picture, but also keeper and Dynasty. Like, where are you at? Do you believe in the skills long-term that Torkelson brings to the table? So if it's not in Detroit, is there still an opportunity for him to be an impact everyday guy somewhere else in the long run?
I don't know, man. Before 2023, I tried to trade for him in a league, and we had this exchange with the owner. He was like, "I don't, what are you trying to do here? It's Spencer Torkelson. He's like a 1-1 or whatever. Like you can't just have him." And it was like, well, we're not generally. That upbeat about his future, but we thought we'd give it a shot. You're right. It's like, you either believe in it or you don't. Then he had that season and we were like, oh, maybe he's on his way. But then he had 2024, and just the sum of it to me is somebody who does not have, for how little he reaches because he doesn't chase that much on pitches outside the zone. He doesn't have a great walk rate, you know? And for as much as the contact he makes, like his 10 to 11% swing strike rate is not that bad. His strikeout rate's higher than you'd expect. So there's something that's not working. Like it's like soft factors or something. You know what I mean? Like if I just told you, here's a guy who's hit the ball 112.7, he's had good barrel rates, he has a 10% swing strike rate for his career, and a 9% walk rate, like you'd be like, yeah, sign me up. So the components are there. But there's something to me about how this is like we've given him almost 1,500 plate appearances. He's been a 95 WRC plus. He's projected for a 102, oopsie 107. That's like league average for a first baseman. So I think I'm leaning I'm out. I can see why you might like process, like you might do the Voltron thing where you're like, if I take this strikeout rate and this swing strike rate and this barrel rate and this max EV and this walk rate, I can make a 240 hitter with 35 homers. So I don't know if it's going to happen.
I just ran a custom leaderboard real quick before we put this question up, and for players in the big leagues for the last 3 seasons, so it starts in 2022 with 1,000 or more plate appearances, age 25 or younger, right? That's a pretty interesting group of players, sorted by WRC plus. There's only 38 guys that qualify among position players. Spencer Torkelson, over the 3 years combined, this is his big league career so far, has a 221 average, a 300 OBP, and a 392 slug. That's a 95 WRC plus, and it ranks him 26th out of those 38 players. The only players lower in WRC plus during that same span who are under 25, have also got 1,000 big league plate appearances.
They play premium defensive positions.
Bryson Stott, CJ Abrams, Leody Taveras, MJ Melendez, Jared Kelnick, Dylan Carlson, who's a free agent at 26,
and nobody's trying to sign him.
Yeah, Keibert Ruiz, Geraldo Perdomo, Anthony Volpe, Ezequiel Tovar, Michael Garcia, and Bryce Terang.
So all the guys who can play defense to an elite level are probably fine because they're young and they're cheap, and then you have the guys you say for are corner outfielders and first basemen.
Yeah, and the guys ahead of him with negative, like significantly negative defensive value who've been better with the bat so far, you get up as high as like Andrew Vaughn. And I think he's only been under 25 for part of that time, so his entire body of work doesn't.
Wait, so that's already like, oh my God, he's looking up at Andrew Vaughn?
He's looking up at Andrew Vaughn, a 108 WRC plus.
For his career.
Right. But at least for the time he's under 25 in the last 3 years, a 108 WRC plus by this leaderboard. Nolan Gorman's ahead of him with a 104. It's a 222, 301, 435
Might be in the process of losing his job.
And Christopher Morel, who's like Gorman, but from the right side, also doesn't have a position, strikes out a little less than Gorman. Like those are the types of hitters ahead of Torkelson right now.
And they hit the ball harder, don't they?
Torkelson ran a nice hard hit rate last year. So if you're talking about max, maybe on the max side, but I don't know. Is he hopeless? No, but the comps are not encouraging at this point. So I'm not really going after Torkelson as more than just like a cheap flyer. If he gets cut in a keeper or dynasty league, I can pick him up for a couple of bucks and just see what happens. Sure, at that point,
if you're like rebuilding and you get him as a throw-in, but not somebody you're asking for.
Yeah, it doesn't look good, and maybe you get a little bit of a boost if he ends up in a better playing time situation, because as a righty in those circumstances, he has to hit a lot to get. Yeah,
he's a righty first baseman. Like, he's like, where's he gonna go? Like on top of that, like if he got let go right now, where would he go? Miami. I mean, he's still got an option, so I think he's going to be in the minor leagues to start this season.
Yeah, it's a rough outcome, but thank you for the question. This Hitty Beetle 01. There was actually a Nolan Gorman question too. This came from Just Jack 111. What do you think about Nolan Gorman's playing time projections the longer we go, especially with Nolan Arenado still in St. Louis? That could be a little bit tricky just because of how they have to make all the infield pieces fit. But do you think the Cardinals' 2025 youth focus could actually push him back to the 450 or 500 plate appearance range? Because projections have him closer to 200.
You know what? I saw the most amazing thing. Jeff Zimmerman has a couple posts on Blue Sky or Twitter, and he wrote a thing on Fangraphs that was checking to see playing time projections and who did well at them. And depth charts on Fangraphs are one of the worst. So that is a huge place of possible improvement as a fantasy player, is figuring your own playing time out. And one of the sort of better side ones that was a surprise was Marcel. I think Marcel was like third best out of everything. And you know what Marcel is? Marcel is 5 times last year plus 3 times the year before plus 2 times the year before divided by 10.
Yeah, it's more or less, if I were making a new projection system today, the best I could come up with on my own is something that Marcel did for a long time ago. That's a knock on me, not on Marcel. Marcel's fine.
Well, I bring this up because if you just did a Marcel projection for Gorman, then you would probably get 400 plus, whereas he's being projected for 300, and I think, this is my sort of blank assessment is that I think Thomas Sagasi, might get the shot because I think he's a little bit more the type of player the Cardinals seem to like. I think they sort of shy away from big strikeout guys, and the other guy that's a little bit like Gorman is Jordan Walker, just in terms of hitting the ball hard and striking out too much so far in his major league career and not having great defense. That's not the Cardinal way. Now I don't know if the Cardinal way is changing, and
I see Brian Smith, our producer, fist pumping in the background. Yeah. You said it, not me. I still, cough. Yeah, it's not good.
I just don't know how much is going to change. I mean, I think the youth movement could help Gorman and hurt somebody like Brendan Donovan. Like maybe he gets traded or a little bit of reduced role, but it could also help Sagasi. So it's not obvious who gets the biggest portion of time right now. Fangraphs just said second base is 30-30-30. I think Nolan Art is not going anywhere.
Yeah, if that's your expectation, and they do have to make that decision on Donovan, they could also just trade. I mean, there should be teams that are interested in Brendan Donovan. Maybe they just trade Brendan Donovan because he's not on their next great team. Maybe that's something they have to think about. But to answer just Jack 111's question, I think Gorman's playing time's light. And I think the Marcel example is a good reason why, even if you don't see it happening just yet. Because even if Nolan Arenado is still there on opening day, do you think Nolan Arenado is still there after the trade deadline? I feel like that next round of, hey, we need a guy is going to hit the contending teams in a way where by then, and if they're not winning in St. Louis, maybe Gorman's more open to waiving the no trade clause at that point. I just think there's, as likely as he is to still be on the roster on opening day, he's quite a bit less likely to still be there in August.
And the other thing that's like Cardinal-ish is that like they might say something about taking a step back or not spending free agency or whatever it is, but they did not trade away Sonny Gray. They did not trade away Eric Fedde. And they do have a representative team, right? They are running out a team that looks okay on paper right now. It's a little bit old in places, and it's probably not a great team, but they have a closer. They have some, decent relievers. They have 5 starters. They even have like 6 or 7 starters that are all right. And so if you think about it that way, then there is a chance that somebody like Victor Scott goes back to the minor leagues. Because, he hasn't been great. He has options. You can make the argument he has stuff to work on. Last year in AAA, he had a 59 WRC plus. Like, he's coming off of such a terrible year that it would be like, even if he had a good spring, it'd be like, oh, you're doing good. We want you to keep the momentum going. Like, go to AAA, kill it there. Michael Ciani and Lars Nootbaar can handle center for us. Michael Ciani is an elite defender. And that's so Cardinal-ish to me, is to be like, Michael Ciani is the starting center fielder, Victor Scott in the minor league, Nootbaar is the backup center fielder, and what does that mean? Alec Burleson has to play the field some. Alec Burleson plays the field some. Nolan Gorman has some place to play, even if Sagasi makes the roster or Brendan Donovan does. So, there are, and then Gorman is listed as the top third base option if Arenado goes, and the Yankees could maybe still use Arenado. I don't know why I'm the only one talking about that, I feel like, but they've got Oswald Cabrera listed as their number 1 guy on third base, so there's still a chance that Arenado gets moved. That's an opportunity. Second base is an opportunity, and DH could still be an opportunity if Victor Scott doesn't make the team.
Yeah, a few ways the pieces can fit, even if Arenado's still there for the Cards on opening day. Thanks for that question, Just Jack. We got an accidental omission question from our third base preview. Max Muncy. Did we just not like Max Muncy? No, actually, Max Muncy fell between the space on the rundown and the actual show. It happens sometimes. You get a group of 6 or 7 players lumped together. You hit 5 or 6 out of the 6 or 7, and a Max Muncy falls through the cracks. Kind of like when your cell phone falls out of your pocket and lands in the space in your couch that's not on the floor, and you got to really go fishing around in there. That's where Max Muncy landed. Relatively speaking, on this show, I like Max Muncy
so much.
Oh, it's the worst feeling in the world. You hear it like fall in, but you know it didn't hit the ground
sometimes, and I just know it's in that one part.
You got to get out of the car and move the seat forward. You're cooked. You know it's over. You can hear it. You hear it playing Plinko between the pieces of the car seat. It's just great.
You're on deck. Oh God.
Rerouting. It's your GPS, your drafts, like your notifications are going off. You can't find your phone. It's somewhere.
Well, back to Muncy, I guess. I mean, there were these rumors that Arenado was going there, and like I think that he suffers a little bit from you look across this Dodgers lineup and you're like, whoa, and then they have Max Muncy. He doesn't. He's a little bit like a Kyle Schwarber, where he's going to hurt your batting average and hit homers. He's coming off an injured year, and he's 34, so you're not sure how healthy he will be this year. But again, let me do the Marcel on his playing time real quick. But he does seem like he's just pretty much the everyday-ish starter at third. Do you think they'll throw Edman there sometimes against
not
lefties
really.
and
not
and sit
often.
him, or what do you think?
No, I'm not really worried about playing time. I mean, Muncy's been 565 plate appearances or more every year the previous 3 years until he was hurt last season. He still makes a lot of hard contact. The barrel rate dipped a little, but the swing decisions haven't changed all that much. Look what he was on pace to do last year. He would have hit 30 homers at the pace he was on had he played a full season. Would have drove in 96 and scored 94. Would have looked a lot like what he did in 2023. I think Max Muncy outside the top 200 overall is actually a great value. If you can afford the batting average risk, the projections seem to even be pushing that down a little more
Marcel's
than they need to.
Would be a 570.
Yeah, man. Like the playing time's not really the problem. I just think the average could be light, but it's absolutely fine. And that part of the position is a little thin anyway. So I'm in on Max Muncy.
I mean, he's old though, and you can't completely trust the projections, especially when you can tell just by looking at his max EV that his bat speed is going a little bit. It was his worst barrel rate in 5 years. Actually, his worst barrel rate since he became a regular. So there is some risk that he's turning into like a 50% fly ball guy. That's why he'll never have a good batting average. But OBP leagues, I think I'd still be in, and I don't expect to just have a lot of Max Muncy because I'm actually so worried about third base as a position that I end up getting a third baseman before him.
Oh, okay. Well, I think
but I
he's
could
a good
see
corner.
him as like sort of a last possible acceptable starting third baseman.
Yeah. If you're in a 15-teamer, you addressed everything else first. You're kind of fishing outside the top 200 for someone. I think you could actually do worse than Max Muncy. So thanks a lot for that question, Ubalevsky. I don't think there's a profanity in that handle. If there is, I'm apologizing to anyone.
In another language.
Swore at. Yeah. I think Ubalevsky was a safe handle to read on air. We had one more email from Dr. Tim, who was explaining loose bodies to us. Loose body 101. This is important because I think on our last episode, we're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
In any joint, a small piece of cartilage can get chipped off. The body doesn't eat this up, but the little tiny piece of cartilage is still floating around, getting nourishment from the joint fluid. Over the course of years, it can continue to grow and turn into a little tiny pebble or even bigger. These pebbles are like tiny asteroids with bone in the center and cartilage around them. Treatment for them is typically arthroscopy, a television camera, and those little asteroids are pulled out. Eno mentioned ligament damage, and that technically is true, but it's a little bit more nuanced. For a joint to be wobbly enough to start knocking off pieces of cartilage, ligaments are potentially a little loose and wobbly, and the joint is loose and wobbly. This allows for that kind of instability. I guess technically it is ligament damage, but it's more nuanced than that. So the loose bodies, man. Small piece of cartilage. You got to watch out for those.
I think it's. I'm reading between lines here, but I think it's a decent surgery. It's not like he had surgery on his flexor tendon. It's not like, it's not. If somebody calls that elbow surgery, they're not doing it justice. Like that's one of the lesser elbow surgeries, if I'm correct. And Dr. Tim can correct me in the future, but he's also pointing out that the one I had, and he's right, is an avulsion fracture, which is where the ligament pulls a little piece of bone off and like off the the big mass of bone, and that's different because that's not a fragment that's like floating around. It's still attached to a ligament.
Fracture 101 from Dr. Tim is your standard description. The bone cracks in half. That's pretty obvious. That's a fracture. But the second one is where the ligament pulls that tiny piece off. And he said it's similar to if you put tape on a piece of paper and pull the tape off, it takes a little paper with it. That's the avulsion fracture. Behaves more like a ligament tear, but technically it's called a fracture. It's a good visual, though, because I think that I've seen that before.
Unfortunately on mine, they should have done surgery to push that bone back in. And instead, the bone grew out to meet it. So now I have like a larger bone there than I'm supposed to.
Yeah, it sounds like you're winning. Some bizarre way. I don't think it's helping you.
Not when it's raining. I can feel it.
Thanks to Dr. Tim for the clarity there. If you got questions for us for a future episode, you can send those in through Discord. Drop them in the mailbag channel. You can also email us. ratesandbarrels@gmail.com is one of the many ways to get in touch with us there. You can find us on Blue Sky. Eno is enosaris.bsky.social. I am dvr.bsky.social. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We resume our position preview series in the outfield on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.